If you want to set yourself up for success for 2025, then you need to understand this Mercury retrograde that we have coming up. This is the last Mercury retrograde of 2024, and although it's going to station direct before the new year, this Mercury retrograde really sets up the beginning of 2025 to be kind of a little weird. And that's because Mercury is going to retrograde, and this Mercury retrograde actually pretty much begins the Mars retrograde. And as we get into December of 2024, into January and February of 2025, Mars will continue to be retrograde, and it all kind of starts with this Mercury retrograde kind of initiating all of it. And the theme that I'm going to talk a lot about in this video is how this Mercury retrograde is going to make this time feel like we're going nowhere fast. And so in this video, what I want to do is I want to show you how to use this Mercury retrograde to your advantage to make the most out of it so that you have a successful 2025. And if you don't know me already, my name is Cam Wyatt. I'm a professional astrologer. I've been doing this for almost 8 years at this point. I've seen thousands of clients and I've done hundreds of videos, and I've specialized in telling you exactly what is going on in the transits right now and how to best use it to your advantage. And in this video today, we're going to be going over the Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius that starts on November 25th and that ends on December 25th of 2024. I'm going to be going over all of the transits with it, how to use it to your advantage, how to not be a victim to Mercury retrograde, as well. At the end, we will be going over how it's going to be affecting your zodiac sign. So let's go ahead and begin. So like I said before, this Mercury retrograde is going to be from November 25th to December 15th of 2024. And what's really interesting is this is kind of giving us a small taste of what 2025 is going to be like. And let me explain that real fast. If you've been watching my channel recently over the past few months, I've kind of alluded to the spring of 2025 being a land of delusion. Essentially, in order to be successful in 2025, you need to be focusing more on faith, being a little bit more delusional, and being less focused on like details and explaining things. You need to not necessarily worry about being rational and being logical and having everything make sense. Like, you'll find a lot more success not doing that. And so if you're into like Abraham Hicks or like manifestation stuff, you type of people are going to really like this time and this year. If you're not like that though, and you don't like that, this is probably going to be really challenging. And it's this Mercury retrograde that kind of tees us up for this line of thinking. And so even though that line of thinking of like, being a little bit more delusional, being a little bit more faith-based, kind of just trusting the universe, that really shows up more and more as we get through 2025. You will see it really be initiated by this Mercury retrograde. And so let's talk a little bit about why that's going to be that way. So this Mercury retrograde is really funny. Mercury is going to be going retrograde in the sign of Sagittarius. Mercury is all about rationality, logic, being clear and concise. But Sagittarius is all about hope and faith and belief and seeing the bigger picture and just kind of trusting the universe. And Mercury is in detriment in this zodiac sign. Mercury doesn't do all that well because, again, Mercury's trying to be rational, but Sagittarius is all about being not rational. But what makes this so funny is Mercury is going to be retrograding in Sagittarius, and it will go opposite Jupiter in Gemini. Now, Jupiter, which rules over Sagittarius, is also about hope, faith, abundance, and belief. And Jupiter is also in detriment in Gemini. Gemini is all about being rational, about information, about numbers, and not necessarily so much about believing in things that it cannot see. And so Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini, and Gemini is ruled over by Mercury. So what you're going to see with this Mercury retrograde is Mercury retrograding in detriment in Sagittarius, opposite Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, in detriment, retrograde in Gemini, which is ruled over by Mercury. So these two planets are in each other's signs where they don't do that well, and they're both retrograde and they're both opposite one another. And so long story short, this is an extremely humorous astrology transit. Like, I can't think of anything in the recent past that's like genuinely funny like this. But if you want to know a little bit more about Jupiter and Gemini and its transit, go ahead and watch the video in the link somewhere, wherever it's flipped over this way. I did a whole video about Jupiter and Gemini, about what it means and how it's going to be affecting your zodiac sign. And so what does all that mean? Mercury is retrograding in Sagittarius. If Mercury is about the way that we think and the way that we understand things, Sagittarius is all about our beliefs and our hopes. And a Mercury retrograde is typically symbolic of rethinking things, reorganizing things. Yes, it involves delays and miscommunications and problems, but essentially it's rethinking things. Like, our mind is going over this area again, and it's going over the area of our beliefs, of our faith. And so there's a lot of this kind of like, wait, why do I believe this way? Why am I thinking this way? Does this actually help me? Should I think a little bit bigger? Should I be playing a bigger game? Why am I putting myself in a box here? Like, essentially, Mercury being in Sagittarius and retrograde is like, you trying to be logical and rational isn't necessarily going to work. Like, you're going to have to play the Sagittarius game, which is going to be, can you trust? Can you have faith? Can you think bigger? Can you believe more? And what's funny about this is Jupiter is in Gemini, and Jupiter is all about belief and faith and hope and abundance, but it's in detriment in Gemini, where Gemini is all about, again, logic and rationale. And it's like, essentially, again, I talk about this in the Jupiter and Gemini video, you can't have like abundance if you're trying to think rationally. Like, Abundance is opposed to logic. Abundance is opposed to rationality. If you want more in life, you have to believe in more. However, there's going to be a lot of circumstances in life that make you feel like you can't have more, that's not possible for you, that doesn't make sense, that there's not enough, and that's just simply not true. And this Mercury retrograde is really going to mess with your head if you're trying to be like, no, I have to play in the small realm, and these things that I actually truly want, they're not actually available to me, and I have to play really small, and I have to think logically and rationally. It's like, you're going to lose during this time. Like, you genuinely are going to be forced to get out of your head and out of your mind in order to see a bigger picture here. And you will lose faith as you keep going on if you try to think smaller and smaller, versus if you just pretty much rip out the logic. You say, you know what, I'm just gonna go blindly into this, and I'm just gonna trust the universe, trust myself, work hard, and not necessarily worry about what I think is possible and worry more about what could be possible and thinking in an abundant way. Like, you're going to get that over this Mercury retrograde. It's so important to understand. And this is so critical to understanding how to navigate 2025, is this mindset. Like, we're going to be forced to reckon with this mindset during this Mercury retrograde and as we get into 2025. And the reason I bring this up is the North Node is going to go into Pisces and the South Node is going to go into Virgo. So I'm going to make a whole video about that, by the way. So make sure you subscribe to stay up to date and to get that video. However, long story short, the North Node in Pisces and the South Node in Virgo is very like, we're not really thinking about the data. We're not really thinking about the logical answer. We're just going with our gut. We're just going with our intuition, and that's the only way out of this. And if you want to know more about what Gemini and Sagittarius represent, as well as what Pisces and Virgo represents, consider becoming a member over on my website. I'm just now wrapping up the Zodiac course for my members over on my website. And if you're interested in learning astrology in the most affordable and easy way, that's the place to go. And what you're going to get is every single week, you're going to get a new lecture. Right now, it's on the Zodiac and everything about the Zodiac. And here in December, we're going to be launching the planets course. So if you want to know literally everything about the planets, and I'm not kidding when I'm almost exhausted about everything that we're going into with the Zodiac. It's the same thing with the planets. You're going to know pretty much everything there is to know about the planets once we get into December. You'll get a new lecture every single week about whatever topic I'm teaching. Each month, I also deliver my game plan, which essentially is my coaching for the month for you, of getting you in the right mindset and getting you in the right framework to understand how to use the month ahead to your advantage. As well, you will get monthly rising sign horoscopes, where we go even in more detail about how the next month is going to affect you, and again, how to use it to your advantage. You'll also get weekly tutoring sessions with me, as well as other astrologers, to make sure you understand exactly what the curriculum is teaching and that you understand what I'm teaching you. You'll also get early and ad-free releases of all my videos on YouTube. As well, there's a really, really active Discord. So if you're one of those people that likes astrology, but you don't have any astrology friends, that's what this Discord is for. But the time to sign up is now, so we can get you guys ready for 2025. We're going to have some more fun launches on the membership website here over the next few weeks. So if you're interested in that, make sure you sign up at the link of my website in the description below. So why did I title this Mercury retrograde about going nowhere fast? That's essentially because Mercury, as it's in shadow and stations retrograde, pretty much initiates the Mars retrograde. And like I said before, I have a whole video about the Mars retrograde and how it's going to affect you. If you haven't watched that video already, check it out. The button for that will be somewhere around here. But long story short, the new year does not start on January 1st of 2025. And that is because Mars is going to be retrograde during this time. And Mars is all about moving forward and energy and drive, and it's moving backwards. That doesn't stop until about March, until about springtime. And it's really about the springtime when the new year really sets in, and it's going to be one thing after another of like just shit happening. And it's this Mercury retrograde that has us stop and rethink what we're doing, rethinking what our target is, because that's what Sagittarius is really all about, is about pointing and aiming, rethinking what our target is before we actually initiate, before we actually put the pedal to the metal. And the reason I call this, going nowhere fast, is Mars, which is all about moving forward and energy drive, is slowing down during this Mercury retrograde, and it will start to actually retrograde. And Mercury, which is all about our mind, is also slowing down and moving backwards during this time. So while everything is in fire signs and we want to move really, really fast and we want to go, we're actually slowing down a lot more. And this is important to understand, because during this time, we're going to rethink what our targets are. We're going to rethink what our goals are for 2025. And this is really important. The way I look at this Mercury retrograde opposite Jupiter is like, hey, before you decide to shoot that target, can you shoot at a bigger target? Can you go even farther than you think? Can you go bigger than what you're doing right now? And that thought process is going to make you go, wow, I actually do need to change my direction. I actually do need to change how I'm going to do things. And that change, that slowdown, really continues into January and February of 2025 with the Mars retrograde. But it's this Mercury retrograde that makes our minds actually stop and think about this shit for a second. And so a lot of this Mercury retrograde is readjusting our plans, readjusting our direction, and readjusting our aim. And that's going to involve typical Mercury retrograde things, which is delays, which is miscommunications. And you know what I love about the universe? And this is something, every time this happens to me, I hate it, but I know it's true and it ends up being true. Whatever you get told no for is for a reason, and there's something bigger for you later on. Like, anytime you want something and you just don't get it, that is a blessing in disguise. And I feel like this Mercury retrograde is really going to do that to us, and it's going to suck, but oh, it's going to be so good for us at the end of the day. And so as we readjust our plans, as we readjust our vision, let's actually talk about the timeline of this Mercury retrograde and how all of this looks. So of course, there's always 5 parts to every Mercury retrograde. That's 1, when Mercury enters shadow. That's 2, when Mercury actually goes retrograde and actually moves backwards. 3, that's the halfway point. That's the Mercury cazimi, when Mercury conjoins the sun. 4, when Mercury stations direct and begins to move forward again. And 5, when Mercury leaves shadow, which is going to be when Mercury leaves that space in the sky it goes back and forth from. So first, Mercury enters shadow on Thursday, November 7th. Now you are watching this in the future from November 7th. So I want you to think back to November 7th and what was going on for you around that time. Because as Mercury enters shadow, this is the same degree that Mercury is going to retrograde back to here on December 15th, and it'll station direct at. And this is at 6 degrees Sagittarius. So if you have planets at 6 degrees Sagittarius, or at 6 degrees of the mutable sign, so Virgo, Pisces, and Gemini, this will be pretty important for you. But think back around this time. What was going through your head? What thoughts did you have? What plans did you have? What were you looking to do? And Mercury is in detriment, right? We might be biting off more than we could chew. We might be throwing a lot on our plate and just saying yes to everything, even though we may not be able to handle that. But when Mercury enters shadow, this is when the themes are going to start coming up for the Mercury retrograde of like what's going to go wrong, what plans that we might be making here are actually going to get changed, are actually going to have some delays. And then we get to the second part of the Mercury retrograde, which is when Mercury stations retrograde on November 25th. But in between this time of the 7th and the 25th, I could argue is worse than the actual retrograde, because this is like your phone starts glitching out. Your car starts acting up in a weird way. You start getting some weird vibes. It's this time when Mercury's in shadow when you start to see the beginning of what the Mercury retrograde is going to be. You start seeing the problems start to rear their head a little bit here. And so with Mercury going through shadow between November 7th and the 25th, this is the build up to all of this. This is when we get all of the context of what the Mercury retrograde is going to be about. So really pay attention during this time. And then of course, Mercury stations retrograde on Monday, November 25th. And this is like when you get the text of like, hey, we need to put this off, or hey, you said this weird thing, let's talk about it, or hey, there's a delay in this plan, or that's when your phone breaks, that's when your car breaks down, or again, your phone already broke and the Mercury retrograde is like, okay, I need to send this in to go get it fixed. Like, as Mercury is slowing down, you can't move pretty much any farther until it goes retrograde, and you have to go backwards to handle everything. And this is going to be about the time when we really shift our mindset and go, damn, why am I thinking this way? What else can I change? What else can I do? How can I play a bigger game? And so a lot of the Mercury retrograde, like Mercury stationing retrograde, moving backwards, is like having to move backwards in order to move forward. Again, there's a lot of this month that's like moving really slowly, even though everything's going really fast. And then on Thursday, December 5th, that's when we get to the halfway point of the Mercury retrograde, and that is what we call the Mercury cazimi, and that is when Mercury moves backwards and conjoins the sun, or is otherwise in between the sun and the earth. And this is what we call being in the heart of the sun. Again, the fancy term for it is cazimi. And essentially what this is like the solution moment. It's like you realize what the problem is, you send your car to the mechanic's like, oh, this was the issue, and here's the solution. This is the light bulb moment of the whole thing. So at this point, it's kind of like, all right, we have that realization of like, what do we need to do? What beliefs do we need to change? What plans do we need to change? Because there's already been a delay at this point, so we got to change something. And then on December 15th of 2024, this is when Mercury stations direct, and we finally get to move forward a little bit. But here's the kicker. It's on the full moon in Gemini, and this full moon in Gemini is pretty much on Jupiter. So there's kind of like this grand finale to this Mercury retrograde of being like, okay, here's what plans are going to need to be changed. Here's how I need to get out of my head and start playing a bigger game. And this is how I'm going to do it. Like, there's something about, like, there's so much realization energy going on with this full moon in Gemini on December 15th. And then once we get to January 2nd of 2025, that's when Mercury leaves shadow and we get to go on into new territory. So I will say that does make the new year energy a little bit better. It's like Mercury leaving shadow. It's like, okay, we're genuinely on to new things. We're not just dealing with the same shit back and forth that we have been for the past 2 months. So that's essentially the timeline of these events. Now let's go ahead and jump into how this is going to be affecting your zodiac. And if you really want to know more about your zodiac sign, go and be a member over on my website. I go so deep into the zodiac signs that you're going to know more than pretty much anyone else about the zodiac. And of course, if you want to know what's going to be going on for you month by month, that is also what I do over there. But let's go ahead and start talking about your zodiac sign. All right, so for the Aries risings, Mercury is going to be retrograding in your 9th house of spirituality, religion, belief, far distance travel, higher education like colleges and institutions. Long story short, like the 9th house is pretty much the same topics as this Mercury retrograde is. Is like, again, what are your beliefs? Can you think bigger? Can you have hope? Now, what's interesting is Mercury rules your 3rd house of short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, communication. As well, Mercury rules your 6th house of work, health, employees, coworkers, and your schedule. So I feel like a lot of this, I mean, for a lot of you, there's like a lot of like traveling plans. A lot of you, there's like putting off school or putting off your teaching in order to like do whatever it is that you got to do. But for the majority of the Aries risings is like, what do you really fucking believe? Like, what are you doing with your life? Your 9th house ruler of Jupiter rules your 9th house of Sagittarius. It's in detriment of your 3rd house, where what essentially the 9th, 3rd house stuff is going on for you is like you're realizing you can't apply the knowledge that you know that you have. And then this makes you realize, oh, you may not know as much as you think that you know. And so this is going to be really a bigger test of like, hey, do you actually know what you know? And are you realizing that maybe you don't, and that you maybe need to learn a little bit more, or at least realize where you can learn a little bit more, and again, where you could play a bigger game. But a lot of this is really just focused on like, what are your beliefs? Why do they suck? And can you have a little bit more hope? And can you have a little bit more faith? For the Taurus risings, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your 8th house of other people's money, shared resources, inheritance, death. This is a little complicated because Mercury rules your 2nd house of Gemini. So it rules your 2nd house of money, finances, and resources. And your 2nd house ruler of money is in detriment to the 8th house of other people's money. So if you're like married, there's like a weird money situation going on with you and your spouse. Like they're dependent on your finances, you're dependent on their finances. That could be one way of looking at this. The other way is there's like either debts that have to be paid off because, like, for example, Jupiter is in Gemini in your 2nd house of money, and it rules your 8th house of other people's money. What you see a lot with this is like taking out loans, borrowing money. And so it's like you have more, but it's not really yours. It's indebted. And this is when it's like it kind of comes to bite you in the ass. We need to take care of this. We need to pay this off a little bit more. And Mercury also rules your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, creativity, and children. If you have kids, I would imagine they're going to be a little bit expensive during this time. It's holiday season. I guess that makes sense. Your 5th ruler retrograding in the 8th too is like, let's say you share custody. This would be like, again, like miscommunications or mishaps over all of that stuff. What I would really come back to for all of the Taurus risings, though, is that this has a lot to do with money and shared resources. And it's like there might be the sense of dependency on other people, or the sense of being afraid of being independent, or being afraid of having to be dependent on something else or someone else. And a lot of this is really about like, hey, like, you don't have to do that. You can think a little bit bigger. It's really easy to play a smaller game with money because we just have these limiting beliefs and these self-worth beliefs that don't really work all that well. This is going to be a really interesting time to challenge yourself and say like, okay, can you make more money? Can you get out of this debt? Can you reorganize your finances? Or are you going to live in like fear? Because the 8th house also rules things like fear and the occult and secrets and anxiety. So it's going to be really easy to do that stuff. But like, I would challenge you to not lean into what's easy. And I would challenge you to like, hey, sitting on the couch is comfortable, it's easy, but it's going to slowly kill you. Like getting out of your comfort zone and doing those hard things are going to be those things that make you grow. And that's something that's really prominent here, especially with just money in general. But I'd also argue too with anything related to love and romance and sex and pleasure. Like when your 5th ruler is retrograde in the 8th, it's like you're not getting really what you want. You're exploring what, again, like maybe it's a time where you're just not having as much sex, or you're not getting the love that you need, and you need to kind of like understand what your needs are, or maybe take a break from it. And that's a big part of this too. So again, a lot of this for you guys is like, I think it comes down to like money and self-worth, but that also might come to like love and romance stuff too. Also, if you have kids, probably miscommunication with kids, and maybe one of your kids either gets in trouble or they're expensive. Gemini rising. Boy, the Mercury retrograde is really coming after the Gemini risings and people like me, the Sagittarius risings. This is a lot. This is your 1st and your 7th house being activated really loud. So this is you and other people. If you're single, I'm not going to sit here and say that this Mercury retrograde is like you're going to find, the one that you get married to, but I don't think you're not seeing someone. Is the way I would put this is like, the other way I would look at this is like if you're single, my question is like, how much time and attention are you putting into other people at your own detriment? Mercury rules your first house, and it's in detriment in your seventh house, where it's like you are at detriment to a relationship. And your seventh house ruler, Jupiter, is in detriment in your first house. They are at detriment to you. So there's kind of like this, like, you know, in one way, it's almost like kind of toxic. And another way, if like you're single and you stay single, this is like really rethinking, like, what, like, it's like, why are you simping in relationships, essentially? Now, if you are in a relationship, this has been a complicated year for you guys when it comes to relationships. And this is like, it's so easy to get into this repetitive cycle in relationships where it's like, oh, you know, we've always done things this way and this way and this way. This is like a time where you guys like really need to dissolve the past and like, how do we operate and move forward into the future? How can we have clear lines of communication? It's going to be really easy to have miscommunications in your partnership over this next couple of weeks. It's going to be really easy to get into fights. It's going to be really easy to get into arguments. I don't think that's going to be necessarily helpful. I think what's better here is rather than like again, kind of just ripping off rules to the game and being a little bit more open-minded with how you can have solutions, with how you can communicate. And rather than being like afraid of saying something, like say it with your chest, if that makes sense, and just being open-minded to it. Now, Mercury is going to be squaring Saturn during this retrograde. So there are going to be like some boundaries that, you know, again, it's like being blindfolded. Like you're not going to know where the walls are until you hit the wall. That's kind of like the level here. But a lot of this is reorganizing the relationship, especially based off living situation stuff. So this could be related to parents, but Mercury rules your fourth house of home and family, and it's retrograding your seventh house of relationships. Again, this could be related to a parent, but this also just could be related to your living situation in general. Like you live with your spouse or you live with your significant other. There's this kind of like readjustment phase that's going on here. And it's just, it seems like a lot, but realistically, the way I would have you guys look at this is like, in relationships, they don't have to be defined by how everyone else says that they have to be defined. Like you can make your own definition in relationships. And this would be a really good time to like make your own. Like if you're challenged in a relationship, make your own, like your relationship is your relationship. You can make whatever rules or whatever way that you want it to be. And I think this would be a really good way of like a really good time to like unlock that. And rather than playing in this like, oh, it has to look this way, how else can it look? So for the Cancer risings, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your sixth house of work, health, labor. And when I say work, it's not necessarily like your like the 10th house in the chart is like the title that you wear for work versus the sixth house is like the labor that goes into that title. It also rules pets. It rules ill health or like upkeeping your health. And so a lot of this is just delays. Like again, having to call off work, maybe getting sick. Your 12th ruler of the subconscious of fears and phobias, self-sabotage, is Gemini, and it's in detriment in retrograding in your sixth house of ill health. You know, I wasn't that, like, I've always been kind of a believer that, like, your beliefs, like, there's something spiritual to diseases. And I had a client recently that was just like, I could not believe her story with how, like, a traumatic event in her situation around it literally manifested into a disease in such a specific way that I don't want to get into details with. But yeah, what's going on in your head? What's going on in your brain? Is that going to manifest itself into issues within your body? Is that going to manifest itself into issues with your work? Again, at the minimum, this is like, again, like a rescheduling of work, a delay with work, a miscommunication with coworkers. Your sixth house, the ruler of your sixth house is Jupiter. The sixth house rules coworkers, and it's in detriment in your 12th house of like hidden enemies. So there is a kind of like maybe a little bit of a falling out with coworkers, of realizing who's on your side and who's not on your side. But I think a big part of this too is, what are your beliefs about work and labor, and what do you want to change here? Can you get more than you want to? Mars is going to be retrograding in your second house of money too, and it's your 10th ruler of career. Like a big part of it, like there's one thing I know, the Cancer rising's got a lot of job changes ahead, and this is really where it starts. But I think it's really realizing, oh, maybe there is something not optimized with my schedule, not optimized with my work, and I could be doing something different. It's going to set off this chain of events that is essentially you guys making a lot of bigger job and career changes. Leo risings, this Mercury retrograde is happening in your fifth house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation, children, as well as just hobbies and what you do. So a big part of this is rethinking what you want, what you desire, miscommunication with children if you have them, a change of heart in terms of what it is that you want in terms of love and romance. The other part of this is Mercury rules your 11th house of friends, and it's in detriment in your fifth house of like hobbies and activities. So like the 11th, fifth house axis is like, the fifth house is like what you like to do, and the 11th house is who you like to do it with. And these two things are at detriment. It's like, you're not really liking what you do, and you don't really like what you do, who you're doing it with. And so there needs to be this like readjustment of like, who are your friends? Why are they your friends? What do you guys do together? Is that really what you like to do? And I feel like a lot of this is relationship oriented too, because the fifth house does rule like love and romance, sex and pleasure, and Mercury's retrograding in there, and Mars is retrograding your first house. This Mars retrograde is happening in your first house of you and yourself, opposite Pluto in your seventh house of relationships. So like you guys, the Leo risings in particular are kind of going through a weird thing of like losing some confidence, but I feel like a lot of it is like, just what do you want? Like the Mercury retrograde is, again, issues with children, miscommunication with children, rethinking what it is that is fun for you, your hobbies. Mercury also rules your second house of money. And so this might be spending a little bit more money on your hobbies, spending money on going out. The fifth house also rules vices like drugs and alcohol. So there's this like rethinking that area for you. Like, are you going to go sober for the new year or something like that? But it's also money. Are you spending money on a hobby? Should you be spending more money on a hobby? Should you be spending less money on a hobby? Mercury is also going to be squaring Saturn during this time too. So this is going to kind of like have some miscommunications related to your relationships, both your spouse, your significant other, or coworkers at that same point, or employees, depending on your situation. But a lot of this is just really rethinking, like, what the hell do you want? Or again, if you're an artist or a musician, there's delays with your art and your music. Okay, Virgo risings. Mercury's going to go retrograde in your fourth house of home and family. This one's really interesting because Mercury rules your ascendant, and it rules you, but it also rules your 10th house of career, reputation, legacy. So there's going to be delays related to home and family and living situation. Again, this might just be a miscommunication with parents. This might be what I've been seeing for both the Pisces and the Virgo risings is if Mercury rules your 10th house of career and it's in detriment of your fourth house, but your fourth house ruler of home and living situations in detriment of your 10th house of career, there's like something about living and work that's just not vibing together. It's like, you live too far away from your job, and so your house is neglected, but then you work so much at, but you're too focused on home, so your job is neglected. There's like this kind of weird balance between what you think you can do for work and where you live, and just rethinking that. Like, that's really the main part of it. Like, yeah, Mercury's going to retrograde square Saturn in your seventh house of relationships. So there is some tension in relationships. And again, this could just be a Mercury retrograde in your fourth related to like miscommunications and changing the way that you communicate with your parents. There's just a big part of this that's like, what situation are you in with your living situation? And how does that fuck up your work? And how does your work fuck up your living situation? And just reorganizing that. And again, think bigger. For the Libra risings, Mercury is going to go retrograde in your third house. The third house is a lot of things. It's short distance travel. It is siblings. It is neighbors. It is communication. It is tech. It is cars. And so there's going to be some delays and some issues here. The 12th house rules hidden enemies, which Virgo also rules. Virgo, which rules Mercury, rules your 12th house of hidden enemies. It rules self-sabotage, isolation, alienation, and it's retrograde in your third house. So again, like maybe your phone gets stolen. Maybe there's a conflict with your neighbor or something like that. And Mercury also rules your ninth house of spirituality, religion. You guys are going through the same thing as the Aries risings, which is pretty much like, what do you believe? Why do you believe what you believe? And are you realizing that you aren't really all that good at applying the knowledge that you have, and that maybe the knowledge that you have isn't good enough? Like, your third house ruler of applying knowledge, the third house is about applying knowledge, is in detriment of the ninth house of learning. So you're like, oh, I need to learn more. But your ninth house ruler of learning more is in detriment of the third house of doing it, where you're like, damn, I don't even know how to learn. I don't even know how to apply this. So there's just kind of like a really big like meta rethink of like what you're doing, why you're doing it, what you know, what you're applying if you know. That's kind of the weird thing. I would also argue too that there just might be issues with cars and neighbors for the majority. Mercury is also squaring Saturn. So there is this kind of issue. Saturn does rule your fourth house of home and family, rules your fifth house of love and romance. So there might just be some miscommunications related to family members, or again, any sort of romantic situation. Saturn is in your sixth house of like work and pets. So this might just bring some delays with works and pets, but that's kind of the vibe. So Scorpio, Mercury is going to be retrograding in your second house of money. You guys have the same issue as the Taurus risings. Your second house ruler of money, which is Jupiter, is in detriment of your eighth house of other people's money. So it's like you have access to other people's money, okay? But your eighth ruler of other people's money is in detriment of your second house of your money. So there's a lot, like I know a lot of Scorpio risings that are taking out debt, that are taking out loans to pay for, this, to pay for that. And again, it could be for business. It could just be a part of it. But a lot of this is just really reorganizing finances here. You're probably going to have some delays with finances. You're going to have some money locked up in some areas. For a lot of the Scorpio risings, you guys are changing your job in a lot of ways because of the Mars retrograde in your 10th house and into your 9th house. So I feel like this is really like, okay, if I'm going to change my job, I've got to reorganize my finances. I've got to reorganize all of this. Now, this will deal with 11th house topics of friendships. The Mercury does rule your 11th house of friends. It's retrograding in your second house of money. So there's just like this delay related to friends, related to other people's resources. Like, again, maybe you work with your friends and your friends are like how you make your money. There's going to be a delay with that. The biggest thing here is just like really rethinking your finances and your money and what kind of money that you can make. And that's going to spur off a huge change in your career. Because the Scorpio risings, like the Cancer risings and the Scorpio risings, have a huge change with career coming up. Sag risings, all relationship stuff for you guys. Your ascendant ruler is in detriment in your 7th house of relationships, and your 7th house ruler of relationships is in detriment and retrograde in your 1st house of you. There's going to be a miscommunication in relationships. There's going to be a rethinking of relationships and how you interact. And a lot of this is like, if you're single, you're probably not. You're probably involved with something or someone at this point. Or again, if you're single and you stay that way, it's like you're really just rethinking how you involve yourself in relationships. If you're in a relationship, this is really reconfiguring how, like, again, I'm going to give you the same advice I saw. Like, pretty much just watch Gemini rising too, by the way. Don't play by whatever set rules you think you have to play by. You can set any other rules and any other way that you want to within your relationship. It's your relationship. Do with it as you please. But a lot of this is a miscommunication, and it's going to be easy to be overwhelmed. And I think what you want to actually do is like open up your mind to different scenarios, open up your mind to different ways of thinking about it. It's also your 10th ruler of career too. Like Mercury rules Virgo, Virgo rules your 10th house of career. So there's going to be a delay and a miscommunication in the way that you put yourself out there for work. And that's going to show up again in your relationships as well. This might bring up living situation stuff, because Mercury is going to be squaring Saturn in your 4th house of living situation, and Jupiter also rules your 4th house of living situation. So there's just kind of like, for the Sag, Geminis, and Virgo and Pisces, it's just like all-encompassing life stuff, essentially. It's like, it's not just about one thing. It's like in your whole entire life. Like there's just like you need to think bigger. You need to change the game. You need to see things differently. For the Capricorn risings, Mercury is going retrograde in your 12th house of isolation, alienation, self-sabotage, repressed beliefs. And Mercury rules your 6th house of ill health, work, and labor, and it's retrograding your 12th house of like hidden enemies. So again, number one, like you could have a fallout with coworkers. You find out some coworkers or some employees are fucking you over. This could just be being really lost in your head. Like Mercury rules Virgo, and Virgo rules your 9th house of spirituality, religion, beliefs, and it's retrograding the 12th house of self-sabotage and again, like shitty beliefs. So there's like this whole like anxiety thing with you guys this month of like, what do you really believe? What are you really capable of believing? And how do you get in your own way? Like, again, I feel like for the Capricorn risings in particular, it's like you guys are really getting fucked up here. Like you guys are either playing really small and it's really like, there's just something like you guys are really fucked up. Like this Mercury retrograde's fucking you guys up really bad. Not in like a physical way, but like a mentally way. Like, damn, you want to play bigger in your life, but you're playing small. And why are you doing that? Why are you stuck in your head? Why can't you get out of your comfort zone? Like, that's kind of the vibe here. And this is going to really challenge you guys to get out of your head, to get out of your mind, to like trust things. And I think a lot of it is about uncovering what gets in your way. And this is going to be a really weird couple months for you guys, but I think that there's a lot good moving forward with stuff. I just think there's a lot of like really realizing how much you get in your own way. For the Aquarius risings, this is weird because it's hard to not just look at Mars retrograding in your 7th house of relationships and that this is mostly relationship oriented, but Mercury is retrograding in your 11th house of friends. So there's a delay with friends. There's a miscommunication with friends. There's a rethinking of your friend group. And Mercury rules your 5th house of love, romance, sex, pleasure, art, music, recreation, and children. So a lot of this, like the 11th, 5th house axis is essentially like the 5th house is what you like to do, and the 11th house is who you do it with. Now, your 5th ruler is in detriment of your 11th house, and your 11th house ruler is in detriment of your 5th house, which is like, I don't like what I'm doing, and I don't like who I'm doing it with. I need to rethink these things. That's kind of the vibe here. Now, Mercury is retrograding your 11th house of friends, and Mars is retrograding your 7th house of relationships. There's a lot of rethinking relationships in your life here. But Mercury also rules your 8th house of other people's money and shared resources. So this is kind of like, are you dependent on other people and their resources for your own work? And there's going to be some miscommunications and delays with that. Mercury is going to be retrograding opposite Jupiter, and Jupiter rules your 2nd house of money, and Mercury will be retrograde squaring Saturn in your 2nd house of money. So a lot of this is like financial too, of like, hey, you know, it's not just like I'm just rethinking my friends. It's like rethinking friendships and work and money around them, because there is some sort of a shared resource aspect to it. So this looks a little bit complicated, but the way I look at this is like you don't have to have shitty friends. It's really not that hard. Like a lot of this is like you guys just have problems with relationships, and you need to change those relationships and like think bigger, think more grateful, think better. And for the Pisces risings, Mercury's retrograding in your 10th house of career, reputation, and legacy. It's going to be going opposite Jupiter in your 4th house of home and family. This is the same thing for the Virgo rising, Sag rising, Gemini risings. This is an all-encompassing Mercury retrograde. Mercury rules your 7th house of relationships, and it's going retrograde in your 10th house of career. The 7th house can rule clients as well, and being retrograde in your 10th house of career is like reconfiguring your clients, mistakes with your clients, or Mercury retrograding in your 10th house is just a delay with your work and your career because of living situation and home stuff. But your home and living situation stuff is also delayed because of career stuff. So there's just a lot of all-encompassing issues here, but the way I would really look at it is like you're probably going to have to take on a lot, but I would also recommend playing bigger. This is really affecting you guys in the playing bigger stage. Like your 10th house ruler of careers in detriment, your 4th house of home and family. Like, sure, you might have had some living situation stuff or some family drama that's getting in the way of doing stuff, but Jupiter was your 1st house of your body, and it's a detriment in the 4th house of living situation. Mercury is going to be squaring Saturn, that is in Pisces, in your 1st house too. There's a lot of just like seeing where do you get in your own way and how can you play bigger. And it's like how you do one thing is how you do everything. And this Mercury retrograde is just going to be so loudly obvious, if that makes sense. Like it's not just like, oh, I have an issue with my working career, but everything else is fine. It's like, no, everything is everything is the same. And how you do one thing is how you do everything. And if there's an issue with your career, if there's an issue with yourself, if there's an issue with your living situation, it's all going to manifest in the same way. So it's like you have to kind of like have a complete mindset shift over your whole fucking life in order to figure this one out. It's really all not that bad. It's just, again, it's funny. It's funny how overwhelming it is. I don't necessarily qualify this as bad though. And so if you made it all the way here at the very end, I'm assuming you're Pisces rising, you are here, but if not, that's fine. Thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure you like it. Let me know what you're excited for in the comments below. And like I said, we've got a lot of astrology content coming up for you for 2025 because so much happens. And make sure you subscribe to make sure you see all those videos. With that being said, I love and appreciate you, and I'll be seeing you next time.